Hi, mine's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the latest report of large numbers of qualified UK medics leaving the NHS, leaving for other countries such as Australia or Canada, leaving for the private sector. And you think, well, what on earth could be driving so many doctors and nurses away from our NHS, do you suppose? But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, the government are moaning at striking doctors this week. I've not seen their schedule. It's probably nurses next week, paramedics the week after, then back to doctors maybe. Our feckless media keep banging on about the harm caused by NHS doctors, nurses and whomever else withdrawing their labour for a few days. But striking medics are the least of our worries. The public should be much more concerned by the qualified doctors, nurses and others who carry out zero work for the NHS at any time of year. Those who work for private practices, which most of the public will never see any benefit from. Those leaving to work in countries where they are valued and where that value is reflected in their pay packet. For all those complaining about the strikes, there is a question they need to answer. I tried to get someone to answer it on Twitter last night. Someone made the mistake of butting into me. They didn't answer it, of course. I asked them a few times, got no answer. They just ran away. Because people never think through their own arguments. Why are people complaining about junior doctors going on strike for a few days, but they don't complain about the many thousands who have permanently withdrawn their labour? We are short at least 9,000 doctors in the NHS. That's 9,000 doctors who never turn up to work in the NHS. This is labour that has been absent from the NHS for years and will continue for more years until this is addressed. Why don't they complain about that? They're basically saying to these doctors, how dare you go on strike for a few days? It's like, well, what about the ones who go on strike for 365 days of the year? They're fine with that. What? How does that make sense? And when people usually moan about strikes, when it is purely about pay, they can make the argument, oh yeah, but if the worker just left, they don't like it, they can leave. If they just left, then the company can hire someone else. That isn't the case here. That can't happen. These strikes aren't just about NHS medics objecting to pay cuts each year for more than a decade, which is justification enough. They're about saving the NHS itself as well. They're striking on behalf of the rest of us. See, when a doctor leaves the NHS for private practice or for another country, they're not replaced. It's all right to say, well, if you don't like it, go away. A lot of them are going away. We're not replacing them. We've got a shortage of doctors. That means there isn't a queue waiting to work for the NHS when someone leaves. Otherwise, why do we have a shortage of over 9,000? The Times has an article out this week highlighting that doctors and nurses can earn up to 3 times as much in Australia. Granted, you take your life into your hands every time you go to the toilet. Wouldn't be the life for me. Still, Australians seem to cope with the life, possibly aided by copious amounts of beer, I don't know. But the article did suggest that Australian hospitals were particularly targeting British doctors right now. And why would this be a particularly good time to poach medical staff in the UK, especially England? Because the rate of pay for NHS medics has gone down and down and down since the Tories took over. Real terms pay cuts to the point where many of these workers are struggling with the cost of living. We've actually got nurses and doctors struggling with the cost of living. See, it's one thing when you find out you could earn a lot more money in another country. You know, a lot of people don't necessarily like the idea of moving to another country. You know, I remember someone suggesting many years ago that I work as a teacher in the Middle East at one point. I'm too much of a homebody. I don't have a grass is greener type of outlook. I don't mind the miserable weather. I quite like it, really. I'm not all that keen on the sun, if I'm honest. I'd miss fish and chips. It wasn't for me. But I was also managing. Now, imagine if I couldn't afford the cost of living. And then someone suggested I could get paid a lot of money teaching in the Middle East. Well, that might have sounded a lot more enticing. After all, fish and chips aren't much of an attraction if you can't afford them anyway. And this is the serious problem that we all face. Australia, Canada, other countries in need of more doctors and nurses themselves and they can now more successfully target the UK because our cost of living is high. Wage increases are negative in real terms. And according to this article, it's not just doctors and nurses that Australia wants. They're after police officers, plumbers, teachers as well. Oh, good. Other professions we already don't have enough of, thanks to the Tories. It's all right reporting the news that Sunak wants an election next autumn, assuming this is indeed when it happens. That's still another year and a half to watch the continuing exodus of qualified professionals leaving the NHS. Because if they do not get a reasonable pay offer as a result of these strikes, that's a lot of the doctors and nurses taking part at the moment are the ones who are basically their last tether. They are actually going to leave the NHS. This is the last roll of the die for them. So, and that means we lose them, and we lose them permanently because there's shortages of doctors, nurses, paramedics, everything. And it's all right, Labour saying that they will fund more training places at university. Oh, let's just wait a year and a half, then Labour are going to fund more training places. Takes years to see the benefit of that. We're talking 10 years. Yes, we need it, but what are we going to do in the short term? We need more medical staff, and we need it now. If we cannot even hang on to our domestic crop, that means needing a whole load more from overseas, apart from anything else. And that is only a problem for us, the public. It's not a problem for the Conservatives. Don't imagine just because healthcare is a top issue for voters that the Tories care. They are highly motivated to keep giving public sector workers, including doctors and nurses, real terms pay cuts. One, it encourages medical staff to leave the NHS, whether for better paid work elsewhere or the same work in a country that pays better. This makes the NHS more and more unsustainable, which is what they want, because they want the UK to adopt a US-style system of unaffordable private health insurance. Second, if they pay NHS doctors, say, properly, then private medical providers all of a sudden have a harder job trying to attract doctors. So they'd have to increase their pay offers. That hits their profits. And senior members of the Conservative Party, including Rishi Sunak, are very close to private medical providers. So from whichever angle you look at this, the Tories are more than happy to watch staff walk away from the NHS. It would be different if the public could see the link between the Tories' underfunding of the NHS and the state of decay which has now taken hold. You know, they won't even read articles like this one in the Times and say it's the Tories' fault. They'll just think that the exodus is caused by Australia paying higher salaries, without ever wondering why the UK, which is a much wealthier country, cannot do likewise. Granted, the public, crucially including the Tory voting public, are essentially still on the side of doctors and nurses. This is why the government do not want these strikes taking place in the same way that they were comfortable seeing them for rail workers. But the government are absolutely not interested in engaging in good faith. Only engaging just enough to get their target voters thinking the government are at least trying. The government wants to be seen to be trying, but ultimately wave the NHS doctors, nurses, paramedics and so goodbye. Oh, you want to work somewhere else? Okay, bye-bye, bye-bye. But the Conservatives really want to break the NHS, and they are now worried that they've only got another year to do so. So they'll be stepping up their efforts. This is why they've been so inconsistent about talks. A couple of weeks ago, the Health Secretary, Stephen Barclay, was saying he couldn't arrange talks. He was trying to arrange talks, but the unions kept setting preconditions. This was a lie. He even said it in Parliament, and it was a lie, and it was a proven lie. They hadn't. They provided the documentary evidence that says there were no conditions for talks at all. Now the government is setting their own preconditions. They are setting preconditions for talks. They say they will only meet with doctors if they stop the strikes and drop their demands for better pay. Well, what do they think the strikes are all about? What are they going to talk about if not better pay? What do they think the strikes are about? Besides, the doctors and nurses, and anyone else come to it, were asking for talks for months before any strikes ever even began. Strikes didn't just pop up out of the ground. This was after months of the government refusing to talk. The government didn't want to talk before the strikes were started, and now they don't want to talk now that they have started. Well, which is it? They want to string this out as much as possible. They just want excuses. That's what they want. They don't want to deal with it. They want to get as many professionals as possible to leave the NHS, have as many excuses to dissolve NHS services. Oh, we haven't got the staff to deliver that service now. We'll have to get the private providers to do it. You know, they want to string it out as long as possible to weaken the NHS as much as possible. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. Well, until next time, I'll see you later.